A Turo IPO has been on the horizon for about 2 years now. You see, back in 2021, there was rumors swirling around everywhere that Turo was going to potentially file an IPO in 2022. Then in January 2022, Turo confirmed these rumors by filing paperwork with the intention to eventually IPO. But here we are in June of 2023, Turo still hasn't IPO'd, and there's been virtually no discussion about whether or not this is still going to happen, and if so, when it will happen. But because of the fact that Turo has filed paperwork to go public, that means that every so often we get a glimpse into the financials and overall performance of Turo as a company. This is something called an S1 filing, and because of the fact that Turo has publicly intended to go public, they have to update their S1 filing every so often with new performance metrics, financials, and any potential hurdles or red flags that the company could be experiencing. Turo gave us an S1 filing at the beginning of this year that reflected the entire 2022 year, and they just updated us with some new Q1 of 2023 data. So in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down the most up-to-date information regarding Turo as a company and their financials, and most importantly, I'm going to be talking about what this means if you're somebody who's wanting to become a Turo host, or if you're somebody that is already on Turo. So let's get started. So let's first address that Turo IPO. Now, like I mentioned a moment ago, Turo filed paperwork to IPO back in January of 2022. Now, despite the fact that January of 2022 feels like it could have been last month, this was in fact about 18 months ago. And whenever you file paperwork for an IPO, you're basically telling investors and the stock market that you intend to go public. You want to become a publicly traded company. And whenever you begin the IPO process, it can become a pretty lengthy one because there's a bunch of due diligence that's involved, paperwork, it is quite cumbersome, and I'm not even going to try to go into the depth of it here in this video. The fact is, it is pretty normal for a company to take quite a while to go public from the time in which they actually filed their IPO paperwork. But in Turo's case, 18 months is quite a long time. But it actually isn't as abnormal as you may think. And as far as the delay of Turo actually going public, it actually doesn't mean a whole lot for the company as a whole. It certainly isn't necessarily negative. You see, companies tend to go public whenever the stock market is in a bull market, which is one of the reasons why we saw companies go public left and right in 2020 and 2021, and you even saw it a bit throughout 2022 as well. But as the stock market has turned and it's declined, turning into a bear market, you may have noticed that we are seeing significantly less IPOs than we have in previous years. This is because companies in general want to IPO whenever the economy and the stock market are more stable, and if possible, whenever these two things are going up, which hasn't been the case in recent months. Because of this, companies like Turo, who had intended to IPO and may have filed their paperwork back in 2022, it is pretty normal for these companies to put off this public offering for as long as possible. And this is exactly what's happening with Turo. And while they actually haven't confirmed that this is in fact the reason why they haven't gone public, this is the overall speculation. And so I will say that in general, the fact that Turo hasn't gone public isn't a red flag or any bad sign at all. It's more telling to the overall state of the market and the economy rather than towards Turo themselves. But as I mentioned a few moments ago, because Turo has filed their paperwork to IPO, they now have to keep the general public up to date on how the company is performing. Think about it sort of like the fact that publicly traded companies have to do quarterly public earnings calls. This is sort of the same thing, but different. And so with this S1 filing, we're able to get a nice glimpse into the company, their financials, and some of the different hardships that the company may be enduring. And so with this S1 filing that Turo has recently released, we get some really great valuable insight into the performance of the company as a whole. And so let's take a bit to dig into this S1 filing. This will be linked down in the description below if you'd like to check it out for yourself. But I will say that things for Turo have slowed down quite a bit. Turo reported losses for the quarter. Revenue, on the other hand, was up in Q1 of 2023 compared to Q1 of 2022, but expenses were quite a bit higher, which led to the unprofitable quarter. This quarter, Turo lost about $11.4 million, while in Q1 of 2022, they actually made about $4 million. Net revenue was at $186 million compared to 2022, where it was at $142 million, so quite an increase. So overall, revenue is increasing, which is a great sign, but expenses are also increasing as well, which has ultimately led to unprofitability for Turo for this quarter, which isn't great. Gross booking value and total days booked are also up, which is great news. This is basically saying how many days cumulatively people booked Turo cars, and this has increased by about 20% from last year. You can see here how the booking days have increased over the years, and you can see how gross booking value has grown as well. And according to Turo, they define gross booking value, or GBV, as the total value of days booked including reimbursable expenses owed to the host by the guest, applicable pass-through taxes, and other fees required to be remitted to local authorities, which are excluded from net revenue. GBV is driven by the number of days and related pricing. One thing that is interesting about this S1 filing is that it not only gives us insight into the financials of the company, but also into some of the different nuance of the company as well. For example, going into some of the different factors that could be affecting profitability in the future, or some of the different hurdles that the company is facing in present day. This isn't a black and white earnings report or financial statement, and really does give you a lot of context into the overall complexities of the company as a whole, which I think is cool. This could include things like profitability. Turo has stated themselves that they have a history of being unprofitable, and as a result, it's difficult to predict how the company will perform moving forward, even going so far as to say that their financials, to an extent, depend on factors outside of Turo's control. The filing also goes into other topics like litigation and class action lawsuits. For example, Dallas-Fort Worth Airport Board versus Turo. Interestingly enough, Dallas-Fort Worth Airport is the closest airport to where I operate my own Turo fleet, and the issue that's going on there is one of the many reasons why I'm glad I don't operate from an airport. Or the state of California versus Turo, Turo versus Massachusetts Port Authority, and more. Now, this filing is quite large, and there's a lot of interesting tidbits about different things that Turo is currently struggling with or succeeding with, so if you want to check it out yourself, again, I will have that link down in the description below. One major pivot that I do want to talk about, and this is something that was not only addressed in this S1 filing, but it is something that I've noticed as a Turo host over the last few months, is a pivot in focus from Turo as a company. And that is the pivot from prioritizing smaller, more casual hosts to instead prioritizing larger career hosts. You see, for a long time, I feel as though Turo really didn't want to embrace their larger hosts out there. Turo as a whole has not been super conducive with operating a large car sharing fleet. The fact that you don't have multiple logins available for one Turo account, the fact that they didn't have automated messaging in-house for the longest time, managing your calendar has been historically difficult. These are all factors that make it incredibly challenging to operate a large fleet on Turo, and once you start bringing in people like employees into the equation, it gets even more difficult. And making the lives of multi-vehicle fleet owners or large Turo hosts easier has never been a priority for Turo, until recently. And this shift has really become noticeable over the last few months, particularly around the time where Turo cut their ties with CarSync, which, full disclaimer, is something I was not supportive of, but I do think that some good changes have come from Turo since then. And I think that these changes that Turo has made have really benefited larger hosts specifically. For example, Turo raised power host requirements. Power hosts have some seriously good benefits, including wheel reimbursements when your wheels are damaged, windshield repair, a much better customer support line, and recently Turo changed the requirements to make it harder to reach power host status. And now you have to have 4 cars and have $36,000 in earnings over the course of the last 365 days. This is a high bar, and there are a lot of Turo hosts that had previously met power host status that no longer meet it. This is a bar that most casual hosts are not going to reach because you have to have at least 4 cars in order to reach that. If you have 4 cars on Turo, chances are you already kind of know what you're doing. You know that you want to look at doing Turo long term, and this isn't something that you're just simply dipping your toes in. It was a big move for Turo to change those requirements so significantly, especially because of the fact that historically, power host status wasn't particularly difficult to reach. And truthfully, I think that the reason why Turo changed these requirements was to incentivize people to get past that 4-car, $36,000 per year mark, which is something they may have not otherwise been incentivized to do. Another example is the Turo calendar. This is a calendar made for multi-vehicle hosts. It's great and it's a huge help. And last but not least is automated tolls and messages. Again, a feature that helps all hosts, but helps large hosts especially. And there's also a bunch of other rumored features that have been discussed over the last few months that I think will have a huge benefit to larger hosts, and I'm not going to discuss those in these videos because they aren't confirmed. But the fact is that all of these different moves that Turo has been making over the last few months, which I'm sure are moves that have really been in progress over the last year or so, these are things that really benefit the larger host versus the 1 or 2 car casual host. But the reason why I think there has been these massive changes is because Turo has finally realized that they need larger multi-vehicle hosts in order to stay afloat. That the idea of going after these smaller hosts, it sounds great in theory, but small hosts are more expensive, they don't stick around as long, and they make some major mistakes that ultimately can hurt the brand as a whole. These larger, more experienced hosts, they are what ultimately keeps the brand growing and keeps it accessible to these other smaller hosts that want to give the brand a try. Again, this isn't confirmed by Turo, but these are just my theories based off of what I've seen over the last couple of years and this pretty drastic pivot that I've seen in the last 6 months. The pivot from prioritizing small casual hosts to instead prioritizing larger hosts. And truthfully, as a 25-car Turo host, I really appreciate this pivot. It has been noticed and it makes a big difference. So in conclusion, though this S1 filing does show that Turo is in fact losing money, I don't necessarily think it means that there are any huge red flags that we need to be aware of. Because as a whole, Turo is growing and their metrics are improving, though their profitability has temporarily declined. If we look at other quarterly results that we received from automotive-related companies or even rental car companies in Q1 of 2023, this is a very similar trend that other companies are experiencing as well. So if Turo was the only company out there losing money, we would be having a different discussion, but that certainly isn't the case, and this is most likely an effect of the overall market as a whole, not Turo as a company specifically. I will say I would like for Turo to allocate more towards marketing because I do think it's needed and people need to become more aware of Turo and what it is as a platform, especially from the guest perspective. But ultimately, we will just have to wait and see what happens for the rest of 2023 and whether or not Turo will finally pull the trigger and IPO at some point this year. But like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it, so make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.